key thing to remember is that there is no Canada. Canada is not a real place. It's not a real country. It is 10 provinces that have their own sets of rules and their own trade relationships, each one of which trades more with the United States than they do with the rest of Canada. I don't mean that to say that that is a bug. That is a feature because it makes the provinces a lot more dynamic and functional when there are changes in environment. Number one, don't think about what is good for Canada. Think about what is good or bad for Ontario or Quebec or BC or Alberta. There is no unit. You guys didn't even get an internal free trade agreement until 2-3 years ago. The future we're moving into is one where we're going to lose a significant amount of energy production out of the Russian space and out of the Persian Gulf. So in that environment, anyone who is a stable energy provider can kind of write their own check. Alberta is, with Texas, at the very top of the list in terms of regional systems that are going to do very well. That's number one. Number two, we're seeing a breakdown in the trade system that allows global fertilizer to be produced. In North America, that does not apply. North America makes all of its own nitrogen fertilizer. Saskatchewan produces almost all of our potash fertilizer, and we can get phosphate from some places within North America, but certainly within the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
So in a world where global food production gets hit hard, North American producers are fine. And the crop that is going to see the most dynamic change in pricing is wheat, because wheat is only grown in places where nothing else will grow.
Because it'll grow almost anywhere comparatively. Yeah.
But we've pushed it to the margin, so it will only grow in places where only wheat can grow with industrial inputs. So if you break down the industrial inputs, most wheat production around the world is going to fail, or it will have to be relocated to better land. That does not apply to North America. So if you want to talk about the crop that is going to see just explosive increases in prices, that's wheat, and that's a story for North Dakota and for Kansas and for the prairies. To be kind of at this nexus and to be the most capital-rich city in Canada, these are good things. If Alberta does nothing different at all, you're going to be one of the fastest growing parts of the world for the next 30 years. Everything is upside potential.
Is Canada being viewed as an energy and perhaps even a food supplier that can be counted on in the next world?
Food supplier, absolutely. There's no reason to expect that will change. Energy supplier, you've never been considered an energy supplier to the world. You're an energy supplier to North America.
To the United States.
There's a difference, yes. And the questions that the Japanese and the Germans had, they were not coming to Canada because they thought it was going to be a slam dunk. They were coming to Canada because it's a Hail Mary. There are no places in the world that can easily step into Russia's shoes from the European or the Asian point of view. And honestly, I don't think the Germans or the Japanese were very hopeful when they arrived in the first place, because let's be honest, you are not a country, you are 10 provinces, which means for Albertan crude to get out, it has to either run
through British Columbia.
Oh my God, I mean, the BCers,
we're about to get a new pipeline there with the Trans Mountain expansion.
I would not hold your breath on that one, because just because the federal government has kind of given in to allow it to happen, the political coalition that is supporting the minority government is not in favor of that. And the federal government is unlikely to do anything, even when it's built, to make sure it can operate. So all of the protest groups, especially the BC government, which is one of the protest groups, are going to do everything they can to stymie that pipeline from the day it's finished. So I wouldn't count on that one. And then if you're going east, oh my God. It's like, it's like BC on steroids in order to get it off to the East Coast.
Right. And especially Quebec has said that they're very, very uninterested in any future pipelines.
And even then, if you can get the natural gas to the coast, you then have to build an LNG liquefaction facility. No one has ever built one of those in less than 5 years. So when Japan and Germany were like, they were kind of hoping against hope that something would happen, but it was hoping against hope. There is no way to fix their problems with LNG in the midterm. The United States and Canada are two of the world's greatest agricultural producers and massive exporters. Check, that's not going anywhere. The North American system can provide for its own input system for agriculture, so it's not going to go anywhere at all. Canada and the United States are two of the world's largest energy producers and processors. That's not going anywhere. So already the basics of civilization look pretty good. We've got ocean moats. We don't have to worry about an invasion. Check. Our demographics. The United States is the healthiest demography in the advanced industrial world. Mexico is the healthiest demography in its peer class. And Canada has the best record in the world, bar none, for attracting people in their 20s and 30s via immigration. Those three together make North America by far the best demographic picture on the planet. So our capital structure is more or less stable. Our consumption base is fine. Our weakness is in manufacturing. Because of the shale revolution, the United States is very good at low-end manufacturing, heavy chemicals, plastics, that sort of thing, because we have the cheapest inputs in the world.
Right.
We're also, because of our educational system, the best at the high end. That's where Canada competes, and not well. In the middle are the Mexicans.
Right.
Everything from heavy machinery to automotive, they excel. So the challenge moving forward is the other stuff, the stuff that we've largely farmed out to East Asia. On the low end, the materials processing, that's primarily a China story. I'm really not worried about the long-term picture, because we're talking about, when you want to turn lithium into metal or bauxite into aluminum, this is 1920s technology. This is not hard. It's not even very expensive. You just have to take the time to build and site the industrial plant, and you don't do that overnight. So it's probably going to take a shortage to force us to do it, but it would already be far more cost effective to do it on the US Gulf Coast than it is in China. So I'm not too worried there. I'm worried about electronics.
Right.
Electronics, computing, cell phones, that sort of thing. The thing with electronics is there are so many pieces of different quality sets that require different labor forces, some of which earn $1 a day, some of which earn $1 a second, in close proximity. So in North America, particularly on the Texas-Mexican border, your average car, the pieces are crossing 5 and 6 times before you get your finished vehicle. That's an industry where we found a way to make it work. Electronics is a lot more complicated than automotive. And the disconnect, the delta between the low end and the high end labor required is much bigger.
Right.
And so you need the Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand. You need all of them to do it at scale. That's going away. The only place in North America where we even theoretically could do that is the U.S.-Mexico border region. And maybe if we loop in Colombia for the really low-end stuff. It's not a natural fit like Southeast Asia is. And so that is going to be the biggest adjustment for us, is how to build electronics at scale without that sort of differentiated labor system. And I do not see many opportunities for Canada to play in that space at all, because the Canadian border is with the United States, which is a similar labor structure.
Right. We don't have those competitive advantages of any kind.
Honestly, the hard work is done. So, and the person you have to think about this is Donald Trump, which I know I can see you breaking out into hives already. One of the many clauses about NAFTA 2. I mean, let me start out. I am not a fan of Trump in any way, shape, or form, but I thought NAFTA 2, the way it was done, how it was done, when it was done, was beautifully done. I realized that
It's
there are a lot of
largely
people
viewed very positively in the business community of Canada, too.
I mean, you guys lost a lot of your perks from NAFTA 1, and let's be honest, it was time. But part of it is that the rules of origin laws, especially when it comes to things like automotive, are pretty strict. And that's really, really bad for any automaker in the world who is not in NAFTA. You are. Now, I think the best way that Canada can leverage this is in processing, and this is specifically Alberta. You've got the land, you've got the green space, and especially in Alberta, you've got the cheap electricity and the cheap energy. And that is the big hole that we have in the midterm. Now, the Gulf Coast is going to do everything it can to dominate this, but there's plenty of room for materials processing in Alberta, and I think you really need to take advantage of that. Beyond that, if you want to go into manufacturing, I'm not sure automotive is the greatest place for you to compete overall, because you don't have proximate centers to synergize with. But the more advanced components, the ones that are very high value added, the ones where transport is a minuscule, if not a rounding error to zero, part of the value. Basically, if the part can be flown to its assembly location in an economically viable manner, that's where you can play. I'm not sure you can do that in automotives or EVs, but I bet you can do that in aerospace and electronics. There was a joke that went around American political circles in the 90s that with the end of the Cold War, New Zealand joined the non-aligned movement and Canada just became an NGO.
I haven't heard that one, but I understand it.
Even if Canada could function as a normal, unified, federal or unitary system, and it can't, even if it could, the shape of Canada, the size of Canada, the fact that it has an Atlantic and a Pacific frontage that are so separated economically, strategically, and culturally, you couldn't play. Because if you can't provide the base security, none of the rest of it works. Now, post-World War II, pre-Ukraine Canadian policy piggybacked on global safety to push development goals and economic development and trade access. And in that, you were a middle power. but it was because of an environment that you could not create or shape. That environment is now gone, and so you would have to create or shape it yourself. You don't have the capacity. You're too far away, you're too split, you're too small. I'd argue the United States doesn't have that capacity to do it at scale on a global basis.
Wow.
We are going to have to choose. Now, the fact that Japan has decided to fuse with American power is a huge step in helping that work in different areas. But I think
Especially
Southeast
naval
Asia,
power. Yeah.
I think Southeast Asia, Northern Europe, specifically Scandinavia, again in partnership with the Brits, and maybe a degree of the Western Hemisphere in general, I think that's what we are going to be limited to. So within that pond, Canada can do a lot. But in addition to making friends with Washington, I would make friends with Tokyo, because if you're looking for something that's a little bit not the United States,
Right.
that's really the only option on deck until such time as the Brits kind of finally figure out what Brexit means.
So over and above that, making friends with Tokyo, I'll ask you another advice question. If you're advising the Prime Minister of Canada, if you don't think we can play as a middle power, how do you think we should play?
This, again, is not going to be a very friendly answer. Every Canadian province trades more with the United States than it does with the rest of the world. That will not change this century. I realize that the primary Canadian cultural identifier is that we're not American. I get it. I understand it.
Even though like 80% of us live, within a
within
2-hour
sight
drive.
of the border. Yeah. I would say that the best way, if the goal is to maintain a little bit of light between the United States and Canada, and I understand why that is, the only place you can play is finance. Your energy goes south, your food processing largely goes through American ports. There's really not another player here, and your trade is dependent on American security. But there's a lot of money that's really scared from the rest of the world that is looking for a place to call home. And until recently, all of it that comes to Canada has been going into housing, and you need to redirect that somewhere else.
Right.